New reporting from the Real News Network shines light on the dubious circumstances of one man's arrest in a small West Virginia town and how financial incentives and fining are driving over-policing in rural areas. According to the reporting, when Milton cops broke into Cody Cecil's home without a warrant, intent on seizing the 8 small hemp plants he was growing in his RV, he protested, but it didn't matter.
I just want to see a warrant. That's it. And I will come out. I don't have nothing in here. I don't have nothing to hide. But you just beat my door down and you're trying to make me look like a straight criminal. I don't know what I did wrong. Like, what is the big issue, dude? Like, was I in here, like, because you guys didn't even show probable cause or a warrant? Hours after you got here? Come on. Anybody? I didn't even know what I did wrong. You see what I'm saying? What,
marijuana grow.
Yeah, what, my plants? You feel good for busting some plants? I'm out here trying to stop you from smoking meth. Welcome to the search warrant.
Cecil was held on $100,000 bail, and investigative reporters Stephen Janis and Taya Graham did some digging. It turns out the city of Milton accrues almost 30% of its operating budget from fines, with the city of 2,500 people raking in over $500,000 a year in penalties alone. They join us now to expand on their reporting. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You know, so this just is outrageous, I think, and something obviously not happening just here, but all over America with police, confiscating property, money from people who have very little recourse. Can you talk about that? What did this person do found in this situation, and what do people usually do, which is not a lot because they have the whole system stacked against them?
Well, it's really interesting because we see, people think of policing as an urban issue, but we found through our reporting in many small towns that police has an incredible amount of power in small communities, both economic and social, because they really kind of suck up a lot of the resources of the community. And because so much of the city budget in this particular city was dependent upon police collecting fines, it sort of casts a shadow over any type of arrest. And in the case of Cody Cecil, you can see that the cops show up, don't have a warrant, break into his home for, what is legal in his own state. Right. And then he has $100,000 bail. They actually charge him with intent to distribute. They charge him with transporting drugs over interstate lines. So it really, I think a lot of this isn't covered because, in these rural communities, they don't have a lot of media and they don't have the same sort of scrutiny. And these police departments can grow. And in this city, for example, the fines have tripled almost in 10 years, and the police department has doubled in size. So there's a lot of perverse incentives in these small communities.
And so Taya, I grew up in a small rural town, and so I witnessed firsthand, like, police abuse, police corruption, lists how kind of how the criticisms that we have heard from, say, Black Lives Matter about policing in urban areas are by no means limited to those areas, and that's why I've always thought there was potential for a coalition when it came to police reform between people in rural areas and people in cities who are dealing with very similar circumstances. How endemic have you found that police abuse is in rural areas around the country?
Well, I think you made a really interesting point, because often when we think about police brutality or police misconduct, we think about cities and we think about minority cities, like my own city of Baltimore. But what we have found over the past 3 years is that there's a practice of over-policing in rural areas. And Milton, West Virginia is just a microcosm of this. What we did, we started pulling on the thread. We started investigating the city council budget. And what we found is that this is actually a really small and kind of a poor town. The median income is only $22,000 a year. They're not able to extract much revenue from property taxes. So really the criminal justice system there is their primary industry. They don't have manufacturing. It's been deindustrialized. So this is the way that this town actually is able to generate revenue. And what they're doing is they're actually extracting wealth from the community. When people are processed through the criminal justice system, it's just not legal fees and court costs, but they also often lose their jobs, they lose their homes. So this is actually creating a greater divide of inequality in this community. And I think there really is room for coalition building here. I mean, like I said, when we think of violence, we don't think of economic violence. And that's what we're seeing in rural communities. And I think there's some overlap here where people can band together for police reform and police accountability.
And just one quick fact, I mean, people aren't cognizant of this, but some statistics we've looked at shows that actually incarceration in rural communities is rising faster than metropolitan areas, which, is probably not the narrative you think of when you think about police problems and law enforcement problems. But in the past couple of years, it's been rising faster in small communities.
I think some people would probably, not me, but some people would say in response that, well, it's the, police, their budgets aren't high enough. They have to do this because we're not, funding them enough. They need more money, more funding to take on crime, and then they wouldn't have to resort to this kind of thing. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'd like to say in reference to Milton, West Virginia. So in the past 8 years, this town has doubled their police budget. It's over $1.2 million a year now. And does this mean that this town of 2,500 people has suddenly become more criminal? Or is it that the police officers are finding ways to criminalize people in this community? When we did the story on Cody Cecil, we had dozens of people reach out to us. We spoke to a roofer who's told us, and he said this quite frankly, he said that the police department targets people who are poor and people who are minorities in the community. He said that in the past 2 years, he'd been pulled over 8 times just because he said he has an old car that looks like a kind of a junker. So from the community itself, we've been hearing that it's not that there's an increase in crime, it's just that it's an increase of arrests.
I mean, and Milton, West Virginia has a crime rate that is lower than West Virginia as a whole. There are a very small number of crimes, it's a small town. And of course, you look at crimes per person population. But, I didn't see any trends either going backwards or forwards that showed any sort of significant uptick in crime. And that is usually the case in these communities. The crime rates are relatively low, usually below state average. To me, I don't see any correlation between, let's say, some uptick in crime or some wave of violent crime and the increase in police budgets.
So I've heard a lot of people criticize the media's approach to the opioid epidemic by saying, when there was a crack epidemic, the response was criminalization. When there was an opioid epidemic, all of a sudden it's being treated as a public health crisis. And that's absolutely a fair criticism when it comes to the national media. But if you drill down lower in the local areas, a lot of these rural areas are not treating this as a public health issue, and the drug war is being waged in earnest. So, how did you see the opioid epidemic and the drug war intersect with your reporting in West Virginia?
Well, I would like to just give one small example. We took a look at Milton, West Virginia Police Department's Facebook page. And one of the posts that I have to say personally really upset me was a post of 3 people who had been arrested. They had called for help because one of their friends was overdosing from opioids. And what they received instead of help was the police department showing up and incarcerating them. And then they put a picture of the people on the Facebook page. So what they did was tell Milton, West Virginia, if you call for help, if someone is overdosing in your home and you perhaps have a warrant, you perhaps have drugs in your house, you can be arrested. So to me, that's not a commitment to public safety. That's a commitment to incarcerating people.
And I think one of the easiest arrests for local communities, because there isn't that much crime, is to arrest someone for possession of an opioid. People who probably need treatment. And of course, these areas like West Virginia, as we all know, have suffered from opiate addiction and overdose deaths significantly and somewhat disproportionately. So, but for a police officer, it's a pretty easy way to book a stat, put someone in jail and, fine them and whatever. So I think there's a real conflict there between making it a public health or harm reduction versus criminalizing it. And I think you see that playing out in these communities across the country.
Yeah, and I think if you only followed the national conversation, you wouldn't understand that the iron fist is really being brought down in a lot of these communities. And how much of this is fine driven? Are you finding, and how much of it is asset forfeiture? Like are the police trying to seize Cody's RV, for instance?
Well, that's a really interesting question because we contacted the mayor of Milton to ask him to break down for us and give us some more information and background. And to me, what it looks like in the particular documents that we obtained and reviewed, that this is mostly fines and court fees. For example, it's very interesting because Cody is facing $100,000, but he was facing $100,000 bail. After he did a reporting, the bail was reduced to $20,000, but he still has to pay $2,000 directly to the court. He doesn't use a bail bonds, and the court keeps the money if he loses the case and get fined. Now, we asked about the RV. According to his mom, it has not been confiscated. But you can't you can't untangle that. The city budget doesn't list an asset forfeiture fund, but it's quite likely that they could end up seizing it. We just don't know at this point and have been asking and will continue to pursue it because that's a significant, a very important question, because obviously we've seen it in other communities that we report on where asset seizure is pretty important. And it's quite possible this could be also fueled by asset forfeiture.
Well, Stephen Janis, Taya Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.